As Nelson Mandela said, it is in your hands to create a better world for all who live in it. Nelson Mandela was the ANC, which stands for African National Congress, political leader. This political party fought against the apartheid for a lot of years. So first of all, what is the apartheid? The apartheid was a racial segregation system that took place in South Africa and also in Namibia around the 90s. And we're going to talk about how it all came to an end. So first of all, the apartheid in South Africa finally came to an end after years and years of fighting when these events took place. First of all, thanks to the South African president F.W. Clerk, which started to eliminate the different restrictions for racial restrictions. Also, because of the liberation of the ANC activist, as it was named before, Nelson Mandela, and also the free presidential election that took place in South Africa after years. So, in the beginnings of the 1990s, the abolishment of the apartheid started to take place. The President Clerk became president in 1989 and repealed the apartheid restrictions. First of all, he lifted the ban of the ANC and other anti-apartheid movements because it is important to know that many of these political parties and institutions and movements were banned in order to participate in different political governments and different fights of this segregation. He also started to release the political prisoners because there were many people that were imprisoned because of their ideas and their fight against the apartheid and this racial segregation. During these leaders, it was also included Nelson Mandela. So after these actions as a president of Clerk, Nelson Mandela finally walked free in 1990 in February. Mandela was seen as a political leader of the anti-apartheid movement and he motivated a lot of people to fight beside him for their rights. He is very known even today because of this fight, and he is known as a very motivational and example. He also began to negotiate with the President Clerk to put a final end to the apartheid. They both took this fight together, and as they were seen as two big authorities, they could finally have a hope in order to put a final point to this racial injustice. Finally, apartheid finally came to an end when in 1994 the first multiracial presidential election took place in South Africa, where Nelson Mandela was elected the first black president. So it's important to notice that black Africans could not participate in any democratic events. Either they couldn't participate in society. So they could finally participate in these very important democratic procedures, which were the presidential elections, which was a very important step. And finally, Nelson Mandela was elected to become the first black president of South Africa, finally ending the apartheid. Of course, this movement and him becoming the first black president finally put an end to the apartheid, and they started to put an end to the racism and all of that. So, the end of apartheid in South Africa took years of fighting. It's important to notice that it unfortunately took many years of injustice. It finally became true when President F.W. Clerk lifted the apartheid laws and when Nelson Mandela walked free after 27 years and finally became the president in the first multiracial elections. Nowadays, can we be sure that Nelson Mandela's aim remains? There is no longer the apartheid, but unfortunately, we live in a world where there is still racism, and we need to remember this fight to try to abolish these ideas once and for all, because we can no longer stand this injustice. Thank you.